out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity. Here have we come. Stardust and sunlight, mingling through time and through space. Good morning and welcome. It is good to have all of you, friends and family of Lee Castell Anderson. Lee has been a beloved part of this community and this congregation for so many years. But it's not the years that she lived, nor the years that she was a part of this congregation that have the impact. What has the impact is the love, the joy, the music, the laughter that she brought to everyone's heart. I have only been with this congregation for a couple of years and yet met Lee early on. And during that time, she has beat me at Quiddler. She has told me stories. I have watched as she solved puzzles. And even during an online class that she attended on aging, being the only person in the class that was she was the oldest and yet the only one not retired, for she had just published a piece. Lee is a remarkable, amazing woman, and no matter how many years Lee lived, for many of you here were at that grand 100th birthday celebration on August 12th of 2023. No matter how long she lived, it wasn't long enough. Let us be clear on that. Our world needs Lee for another 100 years. So that's our job, my friends. How do we continue that love, that humor, that spirit, that drive, that creativity, that building of community that Lee has taught us? So today, my friends, we gather. We gather to celebrate the life of Leon Castell Anderson, the woman we know as mother, as grandmother, as friend, as Lee. We also deeply mourn. This is a place where you can cry, you can wail, you can be sad because the gift that used to sit with us is no longer here. And it is okay to own that and hold that. Raise your hand if you need a tissue and we'll pass it back. So, my friends, with that, let us begin, because the other thing that Lee did was she gave us music. So let us hear that music. You'll hear a lot today. We'll start with a piece from the choir.
everyone. Today is tomorrow. Joan and my bodies are in Chicago peddling our garlic, but our hearts are here in this sanctuary with all of you. Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, talks about a great longing upon us to live in a world of gifts. And she also reminds us that we are showered with gifts every day, but that they are not meant to be kept. Their life is in their movement, their life is in their giving away. And I would like to share a song with you written by Stuart Stotts back in 1985 called Music in My Mother's House. And we'll start with the chorus. There was music in my mother's house. There was music all around. There was music in my mother's house, and my heart still is full with the sound. So what is that sound coming from the schoolhouse there on Chelsea Road? I believe that sound, that vibration is love. And love between a man and a woman, and love for their family and their friends, and the love of creating beauty. Miss Lee with her stories and her piano, and Eric with his watercolors, and their life together, a long life together, shared with all of us. And we'll finish our song with It All Comes Back So Clearly. Although I'm far away, she gave me the kind of gift I love to give away. And when my mother died and she sang her last song, we gathered in this sanctuary, singing one by one. Everybody please together. There was music in my mother's house. There was music all around, all around. There was music in my mother's house, and my heart still is full with the sound. And my heart still is full with the sound. Thank you, Miss Lee. Thank you.
When Scott asked if we would share memories of Lee and we began to discuss what we would say, we found it wasn't so much memories as it was words and images and emotions.
And times together.
And times. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Okay. I first met Lee in the summer of 1981 when I started interning at Eric's architecture firm here in Stockton. I introduced Pat to Lee later that year after completing my degree at the U of I, and we moved into the apartment above Lee's bookstore, where she also created her writing nook. And I think Scott fixed it up. It was great.
We loved living in that apartment. It was a really special place for us as we began our life together. Lee encouraged me then to write. She likely put a word in with the publisher of the Stockton Herald News. as I started soon to write human interest stories for the paper, interviewing an assortment of locals, and typing up stories on onion paper, read erasable, using a tiny portable typewriter that Lee had loaned to me. She believed in me and my ability to put words to paper. And then Lee and Eric introduced us to this UU church and to the Reverend Patterson, who married us in September of '82.
Lee always struck me as one with a sense of purpose, with a backbone. She was genuinely sweet, kind, gentle, and loving, a twinkle always in her eye and humor in her demeanor. That was my thought. She was just so sweet. We struck out on our own in October '82, leaving the apartment, the firm, as I carried on with my internship. But we stayed connected through architecture, of course, but mainly through our friendship. The circle turned, and at one point, Eric came and worked for my firm for a while, offering invaluable assistance and advice, and gave him some money during retirement, all that good stuff. When Eric closed his office and Lee closed a bookstore, they moved their art to the schoolhouse home. Eric painted on the main level, Lee with her nook in the basement. Separate spaces for serious work. I never forget Eric saying, "I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch," as they each applied themselves daily to their art.
Theirs was a home filled with art, with music, with friends and family and love. Sounds like what Dan said. Lee shared her art with all of us, both as a published author and in the community. For several years, the Freeport Art Museum celebrated Women's History Month with something they called Women's Readers Theater. I don't remember if I brought Lee in or she brought me in or Louisa Stimpard colored us both. Regardless, I recall the wonderful stories that Lee wrote for the readers. Stories about her sisters, her mother, and her mormor. That's grandmother for us non-Swedes. She was also a leader and a mainstay of the local writers group, and I know there's a few of you here today.
As time went on, we would share a meal and catch up, and we'd hear from Lee from time to time. She'd call up and ask about something or another. Even as Eric was breathing his last, she called, and we were there with her and Dan Metzger as Eric made his transition. Soon she made the move to Paul and Susan's home in Elgin. And I want to interlude one thing that she always said, and both of them said. They said, have friends of all ages, and it's always something I've thought. And really for her 100th birthday and for today, this is a sign of friends of all ages.
So when she moved into Paul and Susan's home in Elgin, it's another love-filled home. We stopped to see her a couple times in Elgin, and one of those occasions, Lee asked me when I was going to start writing again. And I promised I would as soon as I was able to retire and find some more time. Still working on that. But her question inspired me once again, and I've begun, slowly, happen chance, short little bits, then haiku. I suspect Lee is tapping her toe, just slightly impatient with me. And I know there's others in this room who've also had that inspiration from Lee.
But, yeah. And then, when we learned that Lee was nearing an end, Scott and Paul graciously allowed us to visit her in the hospital and say our last goodbyes. Thank you, Paul and Scott. That meant a lot to us. Lee loved Eric and her sons and daughters-in-law and grandchildren and all her friends. She loved this community, this church, and its people. She loved all of us.
Lee was probably the most kind and gentle soul either of us will ever meet. She was always quick with a smile, a story, and a hug. So, here's to Lee. If there's a heaven, she's surely in it. And let's hope the good Lord asks her to write the next gospel.
Children's faces looking life of our beloved Lee. Her sons have asked me to talk about her role in life as a writer. But before I begin, thanks to a very generous donation by Lee's publisher of her last book and the Inside Illustrator, everybody can take a copy of Lee's book, Sean's Quest, as they leave the church today as an honor to our beloved friend. And I would also like to thank the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators State Representative Esther Hirschenhorn and the ABC writers Debbie Deutsch and Sheila Kelly Welch for their contributions. I joined the group after some of this history took place. So unfortunately, I'm still really emotional about losing Lee, so I just wrote this out. Please forgive me for reading. Lee was a proud member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. In the 1980s, she answered an ad submitted by Debbie Deutsch in the Freeport Journal-Standard looking for writers who were interested in joining a group of children's book authors, the ABC Writers. Around this time, the Society of Children's Book Writers decided to create networks, geographically based groups across Illinois so their members could stay connected. Lee was the first volunteer to answer this call and serve as Freeport's network representative. Though most of the early SCBWI Illinois members lived in Chicago, Lee watched over her fellow authors from Stockton, Illinois, pre-internet. No X, no Instagram, no TikTok, no cell phone. Lee did these things the old-fashioned way, eyeball to eyeball, heart to heart. Leon was living SCBWI's mission as stated on their website, to support the creation of an abundance of quality children's books so that young people everywhere have the books they need and deserve. She was realizing SCBWI's vision. There can never be too many good children's books. She was both showcasing and passing on each of the SCBWI's values of creativity, community, and professionalism, as she did in our community. Lee served as an invaluable, respected, and cherished mentor to her fellow writers in this role for over 4 decades. How perfect the SCBWI Illinois has appropriately renamed their volunteer luncheon the Lee Anderson Memorial Volunteer Luncheon. Lee never stopped writing and submitting and publishing. Her body of work included her books, My Own Grandpa, Moving Day, Surprise at Muddy Creek, My Friend Next Door, How Come You're So Shy, It's Okay to Cry, The Wonderful Shrinking Shirt, A Christmas Handbook, Sean's War and its sequel, Sean's Quest. Her stories were featured in numerous children's magazines. Among her awards, in the Highlights 1989 contest, she won first prize for Why Leroy Smiled. In 1993, she won the Florida Writers Picture Book Competition, What's That Sound? And she also won another Highlights prize for first place in the early 2000s, which their magazine reaches 1 million kids across the world. So that's quite something. Even as Lee approached her 100th birthday, she continued to be published. In the July-August 2022 issue of Humpty Dumpty Children's Magazine, her story, Grumpy Grady, was their featured Build-A-Book section. This meant that yet another of her books got into the hands of hundreds of thousands of children. The July 22 issue of Cricket Magazine featured her story, Jenny's Friends, and her story, Artistic Cat, was published in the March 2023 issue of Jack and Jill. At the time of her death, at over 100 years old, Lee was working on no less than 4 manuscripts, and I talked to Scott, and I said, I just wish those books get into publish, and apparently Scott's wife has just gotten her MFA, so there's hope that we'll see Lee's writing again into the future. And she was also, she was over 100 years old, and she had several stories out there under consideration from children's magazines still. She worked every single day, and she was always so encouraging. I didn't know that about you, Pat, but she was always just such a kind mentor. Lee was not only an accomplished professional, she epitomized the quote, "Knowledge is something that can never be taken away, but it is worthless unless shared." Lee's stories not only reached, entertained, and taught millions of children, she guided many aspiring authors to do the same. As Sheila Kelly Welch paraphrased on the ending of Charlotte's Web, she was in a class by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a great writer. Lee was both. You will live in our hearts forever.
It's Okay to Cry by Leon Castell Anderson. Ben and Jeremy sat on the bottom step of the back stairway. The brothers watched an ant struggle with a crumb bigger than it was. Ben felt a kinship with the ant. His problem was almost too big for him, too. He leaned over and tried to smooth the path the ant was taking. "Jeremy," he said to his younger brother, "remember how Uncle Jeff always put out an extra plate of food when we went on picnics?" "Yeah," his little brother grinned. "Uncle Jeff said it was so the ants could have their own picnic and leave ours alone." Ben nodded, but he didn't smile. "He told me ants taste with their feelers." Jeremy leaned over to watch the ant. "Uncle Jeff knows a lot of things," he said. "I want him to teach me about ants, too." Ben sighed. He knew Jeremy didn't understand what had happened to Uncle Jeff. Ben was going to have to tell him. After all, Jeremy was only 5. 5-year-olds don't really understand what it means when someone dies, not like people did when they were older. Ben felt a lot older than 9 right now. He pounded the stair with his fist. "Those picnics were fun," Jeremy went on. "How about the time Uncle Jeff boosted me into a tree and helped me climb to the top of the cliff?" Jeremy shivered. "That was scary." Yeah. Jeremy was going to miss out on a lot of things, Ben thought. He fingered a rock from the flower bed. "This isn't flat enough." "Flat enough for what, Ben?" "Flat enough to skip on the water. Uncle Jeff showed me you have to have a pretty skinny stone, see? And then you throw it sideways." Ben stood up suddenly and angrily flung the stone at the back bushes. "Uncle Jeff knows a lot of things," Jeremy said. Ben sighed again. Yeah. How was he going to tell Jeremy there wouldn't be any more picnics with Uncle Jeff, or hikes along the creek, or... Ben put his head down on his knees. After a minute, he said slowly, "When Uncle Jeff used to take me on hikes..." "I want to go on hikes too," Jeremy interrupted. "He'd show me where to find wild asparagus," Ben went on. "I don't like asparagus," said Jeremy. "And where to find those tiny wild strawberries and black raspberries and elderberries." Ben couldn't stop remembering now, even though it hurt to remember. "And Uncle Jeff taught you how to find fish, too." "Catch fish," Ben corrected absently, "and clean them after we caught them. He always said if you're going to catch fish, you should know how to clean it." "Uncle Jeff's going to teach me, too," said Jeremy. "He always gave the fish heads to Stormy before Stormy died." Ben felt as though something were squeezing his throat. "Do you remember when Stormy died?" he asked Jeremy. "Sure, I love that old cat. I felt bad when he wasn't around anymore." "So did I." "You cried," Jeremy said. "I know. Uncle Jeff..." And Ben swallowed. "Uncle Jeff said it was okay to cry." "Uncle Jeff knows a lot of things." Yeah. Ben hunched down on the step. That had been his chance to tell Jeremy, but Ben couldn't find the right words. Jeremy was talking. "Remember when he let us help him move into his apartment?" "Apartment," Ben corrected. "Yeah, and we helped him paint the wall? Boy, was Mom surprised when she saw the color." Ben shook his head. "I think she was kind of mad." "Not mad, though. Not like when she found out about you riding the motorcycle with Uncle Jeff." Ben felt the hair rising on the back of his neck. Didn't Jeremy remember? They had told him about Uncle Jeff's accident. How could he talk about the motorcycle as if nothing had happened? Ben thought back. Mom had been angry when she found out about his ride with Uncle Jeff. She never liked motorcycles. "Don't ever do that again," she shouted, and to Uncle Jeff, "I wish you'd get rid of that thing." But Uncle Jeff hadn't. "I want to ride on Uncle Jeff's motorcycle too," Jeremy said. "No, Jer, no, you don't." Ben's voice cracked. "I do too." Jeremy stood up and faced Ben. "You don't want me to let me do anything. You don't want Uncle Jeff to teach me anything either." Ben opened his mouth to yell at his dumb little brother who didn't understand. Then he slumped down. "Oh, Jer," was all he said. But Jeremy wouldn't be put off. His voice rose and he stuttered. "He taught you lots of things. He taught you—" "I'll teach you, Jeremy." "I want him to teach me." Jeremy's voice sounded funny. Ben heard his own voice, loud and raspy. "He can't, Jeremy. Uncle Jeff died." And then, choking it out so Jeremy would understand, He won't be around anymore." Jeremy blinked and sat down suddenly. "Not ever?" Ben shook his head no. He couldn't get any more words out. "You mean like Stormy?" Ben nodded. "Are you sure?" Ben nodded again. Jeremy's face began to turn red. "That's not fair," he said. He jumped up and stomped on the anthill. "Jeremy!" Ben reached out for his brother. "I don't want to know about those old aunts. Uncle Jeff is mean. Why did he have to die? He didn't want to teach me, that's why." Big wet tears rolled down Jeremy's cheeks, and they seemed to make him more angry than ever. "Hey, Jeremy." Ben pulled his little brother down beside him again on the step. He knew why Jeremy was mad. He felt that way too at first. "He could come back," said Jeremy, "if he really wanted to. Uncle Jeff can do anything." "No, he can't, Jer. Nobody can." Ben's voice sounded thick, but he kept on. "When you die, you can't come back. You just can't. Uncle Jeff didn't want to leave you or me or anybody, but he had that accident on his motorcycle." Ben paused and swallowed. "And he died." With his arm around his brother, Ben could feel Jeremy shaking. "It's okay to cry," he said. "I know," Jeremy said in a tear-muffled voice. "Uncle Jeff said so." Ben knew that his face was just as wet as Jeremy's, but he didn't care. "It's okay to cry," he repeated. After a while, Ben took a long, deep breath and wiped his sleeve across his eyes. "So whatever you want to know now," he said, "I mean, about all the good stuff Uncle Jeff taught me, you can come to me, Jer." As he said the words, a peaceful feeling spread over him. It was as if Uncle Jeff was there, nodding his approval. Jeremy was quiet for a long time. Then he wiped his face to dry the last of his tears. "Ben," he said, "will you teach me how to skip a stone?" So Ben did.
My grandmother was an artist, a prolific one at that. And she made more artists, who made more artists, who made more art to decorate the world. And it's thanks to her. Picture me a foot shorter, a decade younger, scribbling endless stories into my notebooks during recess. Everyone else was playing games. I was playing pretend. Spelling mistakes, no proper punctuation in sight, run on tangents, spilling into overly detailed descriptions. She was enamored with it, of course. Had me type it out for safekeeping. I still have it now. I wouldn't have otherwise. And it made me feel like more of an artist than I thought I had deserved. But she saw it in me. And eventually, with enough practice and encouragement, I got published. Another creative made from scratch. Some will go their whole lives striving to create their masterpiece, but I'd argue Lily made a plethora. Whether a painter or a writer or a dancer or a pianist, the goal of the creative process for many people is to make people see something in a new way, is to let the world in on your perspective for both the world's sake and your own. She saw me in a way I couldn't see myself at the time. And with her love, she convinced me not to suppress or apologize for who I already was. She knew that because she probably had done it to herself a million times. I thank her for the love, for the kindness, for the email poetry exchanges where she'd send me little challenges like, use idioms in this whole poem and don't let it be the whole story. For the attentions to detail, for the time that she'd gifted me to have her. I thank her. I love you. Love, Apple Andy.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more